you so much.
Have a good time. And now we have our next guest, Sue Ann from Canada. Hello, Sue. How are you doing?
Hello, Carolina. Hola.
Wow, it's sunny
Gracias
day
por
there?
la invitación. Yeah, I don't speak Spanish. I wish I spoke Spanish, but just a little poquito and then it's
Hablas un
gone.
poquito de español, qué bien.
So I wanted to thank you for the invitation today. I'm really sorry that I tuned in just in the last couple minutes of the last presenters. It was really interesting what they were presenting. So I'm going to share my screen. I can share my screen, Catalina, from my presentation. Is that okay?
Yeah, but I will I'll do the intro during your brief resume moment.
Oh, perfect. Okay, wonderful. Sorry.
Sue Ann MacDonald is an associate professor in the School of Social Work at the University of Montreal. She has worked for decades in the field of homelessness as an outreach worker and as a researcher. Her research focuses on the varying tensions embedded in the discourse and practices, social health and judicial, that produce oppression, exclusion, and discrimination. She's currently working on projects regarding hidden homelessness across Quebec and participatory action research projects, partnering with local community organizations and people with lived experience to reinforce and develop grassroots preventative and lived expertise approach that empower communities and reduce marginalization and exclusion. Her research program engaged with the colonial and ecological environmental perspective. Recently, she has developed several projects for the discipline of social work and social practice in light of the climate crisis. That's it. Okay, now you could open your file.
Okay, perfect. All right. Oh, I just wanted to, I'm just going to do it on the screen. Sorry. One moment. I'm just going to, it's been a while since I've presented on Zoom. I have to think about this for a second. Okay. Yes, this way. Okay. And I do this. Sorry, just giving me a second here. I'm trying to remember. I want to see my notes and I want to see, I'm just thinking how to do this. Maybe I do it like this. Oh yes, this is how I do it. And then is that okay? Do you see my screen now? Can you hear me, Catalina? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, good. I'm not sure what you see, but maybe you see my notes, but that's okay.
I see different page down.
Yes. Okay, I'm gonna just fix. You know what I'm gonna do? I have a solution. I know what I'm gonna do. It's all good. I actually have a PDF version here, so I'm going to. Okay, arrêter le partage. And I'm going to do it like this. This is going to be better for me. I realize now this is taking me back to when I used to teach during COVID online. It's bringing back a lot of memories.
Yeah.
So now you see my screen,
Yes,
right?
I see it.
Okay, perfect. That's what I want you to see because I want to be able to look at my notes. So I just wanted to thank you for the invitation today. And I'm coming to you today from Montreal, Quebec, Canada, which is also known as Geojage and the Indigenous territory of the Ganeagahaga, who have taken care of this territory and this city for a very long time and is known to Indigenous people as a gathering point of different Indigenous First Nations. So I just want to take a moment to say that because it's important in the kind of work we do to recognize those ancestral rights and that I'm coming to you from unceded stolen territory that is known internationally as Montreal. Today I'm going to do a fairly brief presentation. I know I have to speak slowly because it's in English and my Spanish is not good enough to speak in Spanish. My slides actually originally are in French because I work in French and this project takes place in Quebec, Canada, which is the Francophone province, a large province in Canada that is French speaking, so Francophone. And I'm going to talk today about a project we have underway that we are nearing the end of on greening social work or eco-social social work. And it's really an exploratory project looking at the province where I'm coming to you from, which is Quebec, and about what we are doing here in Quebec in terms of the discipline of social work and hoping to kind of inspire a paradigm shift. So I'm the principal researcher leading this project, but there's other people involved in this project. So at the bottom of my slide is the funding and also the other people involved. So my colleagues, Rosemary Carlton, Lena Dominelli is a collaborator on the project because of course we're very inspired by her work on green social work, and another colleague, Emmanuel Coury. So I'm going to just scroll down. And so the context of this project is, like I said, it's sorry, I just have a lot of people in my house right now. It's summertime here, so kids are not in school. So this project, like I said, it's really a bottom-up exploratory project, some of the context here in Quebec and also some of the context internationally. And I know I'm not the only speaker on the list on the program talking about green or eco-social social work. I see there's someone presenting just after my presentation. I wish I could stay for it, but I unfortunately I cannot. So we know contextually that we have an International Federation of Social Work and International Associations of School of Social Work, as well as other international bodies that are really calling for a better integration of environmental or ecological notions in social work, bringing it really into training, encouraging our knowledge base, encouraging practices as well. So internationally, and for people that were in Panama for the last international conference, just taking a look even at the program of what was presented, probably about a third or a quarter of the presentations were really in the stream of environmental social work, ecological social work, greening social work. So we're really part of there's really a bigger movement happening. So there's kind of a top-down pressure. And here in Quebec, this project also responds to the fact that there, as far as we know, isn't that much happening in the schools of social work. So in the province from which I'm coming to you from, there's 10 schools of social work. I'm in a fairly big school of social work, and I believe across the province, we are the only school that has one course, for instance, on environment and social work, but there's not really a firm integration in training in this moment in Quebec. So this was a starting point for this project to say, this is what we think is happening, but perhaps there are initiatives and there are things happening to green social work, but we're not truly aware of what they are. A few years ago too, our professional order, our College of Social Work, so the professional order that gives license to social workers to be able to practice social work, organized a first professional conference on climate justice and climate change for social workers over several weeks with the different presentations on lunchtime, for instance, different activities to get us thinking about climate justice work, climate change, its impact on the profession, on social work practices. And some of us participated in putting together that program for the Professional College of Social Work. So I'm just giving you a bit of context here about where we're at. At the same time, about 2 years ago, we have a Canadian Association of Social Work Educators that are responsible for making sure that training across the country responds to certain norms, with about 45 different schools of social work across the country. And in these new pedagogical norms, there were 2 new points that were quite central to trying to encourage a paradigm shift. One was a new norm that said that schools have to prepare their students with environmental and ecological knowledge for practice, that we have to bring this into our center, our way of analyzing different social situations. And there was also a point on decolonizing knowledge and decolonizing practice and the self-determination of Indigenous peoples. So these are some of the kind of contextual pieces to understand where our project is coming from and where we started 2 years ago now. We are at the end, reaching the end of the 2-year project. So I'm just going to share with you an overview of some results. But to get started, I just want to make my screen a bit bigger so I can see better. Sorry about that. I'm just playing around with my screen a bit. So the question we really had, the overarching question was, how are green, meaning environmental and ecological notions and issues taken up within social work education and practice in Quebec, Canada? Lena Dominelli is really responsible for developing the concept of green social work. We didn't want to just, it's important here to say that, use one theory development for this work, which is why we put green and little citations there, because we really wanted to explore the broad range of ecological and environmental notions. There's environmental social work, there's eco-social work, there's green social work. So there's a lot of theory development in the moment. And one of the goals of the project was really to have a broad-based approach to exploring what this means for social work educators, for social workers, for students. I'll get to that in the next slide. So really broadly was to really try to paint a portrait or flesh out a portrait of what's happening, and with the ultimate goal of inspiring a paradigm shift due to all those contextual pieces as well that we mentioned, and because with the climate crisis that we're facing, we're not really going to have much of a choice except to really tool, social workers up so that we are better equipped to deal with the challenges that we're already experiencing. So I'm just going to check my time here. I'm probably going too slow. So the theoretical lens of this project, I said it's very much a bottom-up approach, but the overarching paradigm is very much an anti-oppressive one. So really looking at some of the structural pieces that affect and inform our thinking. And joined with the anti-oppression paradigm, we wanted to really mobilize the transformative and transgressive learning perspectives that emerge from critical pedagogy. As I said before, we didn't want to necessarily adopt just green social work or environmental social work or eco-social work, but we really wanted to be inspired by many different critical perspectives, including ecofeminism, intersectional lenses, de- and post-colonial lenses, and post-anthropocentric as well, to really try to encourage this paradigm shift. Joined with that, we really want to understand how learning is also shaped through praxis. So action, reflection, and thinking about action while we're reflecting upon it, while we're in action. And so we also adopted a transformative learning lens with which to understand how we can also encourage ecological consciousness, right? And have people thinking about social work differently and kind of detaching from very anthropocentric ways of thinking and doing and being. So there's just a few quotes here why it was important for us to add, say, transformative learning, why we wanted to join up with those concepts and notions, and be transgressive as well in the work to encourage this paradigm shift. And to also think outside of social work, to think more in terms of a transdisciplinarity and just different epistemic and environmental injustices. So I want to make sure we get to the results. So like I said, it's a small project to begin with. We actually have another project underway as well that emerges from this initial project, but today I'm just going to talk about the initial project. So we had three kinds of participants for focus groups. We had social workers, so practitioners. We had social work educators, which could be, regular professors like myself, to sessional instructors, sometimes students that are finishing their PhDs, but are also sessional instructors. So there's some overlapping here sometimes with these categories, and students. And we had some broad-based questions, but essentially we wanted to know what is known about environmental, ecological social work, green social work, what is actually being done. So what is being taught, what is being practiced, and also what could be developed. So how could we be inspired by other approaches or transdisciplinary approaches that we could bring into social work as well. We had a very good response from practitioners. In fact, there was really there was 18 participants in the social work category focus group. And there was a real desire to talk about, well, I'm trying this in practice, or have you thought about this? Or so there was a really wonderful sharing of experience and sharing of skills and knowledge. And so that was quite a wonderful benefit from the project. We had fewer educators and even fewer students, which was too bad, but students are busy. So yeah, for the moment, it was a small project to just try and flesh out a bit of a portrait about these shifts in social work. And we also were in partnership with the Professional College of Social Workers in Quebec, and an association as well in Quebec. And we did presentations to the schools of social work in Quebec as well to talk about the project. So there was quite a big reaching out about this project. And I think it was helpful just in the sense of starting discussions and, starting a dialogue around where we are and what we could be doing differently, and being inspired by, different practices and knowledge. So there was quite a large kind of mobilization around this project in getting it started. So today what I wanted to do is I have a few slides of results. They're really not exhaustive. I'd say they're jumping off points for thinking about these things. And if people want to, anyone who's listening to this would like to contact me later, I could perhaps explain things a little more deeply than I can do justice to here. But just very quickly, so some of the first questions we asked were, about recognition. What do we recognize about environmental and climate issues in practice, in training, in education? in knowledge development. And so a lot of the participants really emphasized the convergence between the aims of social work and the need to take account of environmental and climate issues. Here on the screen, you see, it didn't come out as clearly as my version in front of me, but just a couple quotes from different participants in the different focus groups. I'm going to try to elaborate and give them some context. So if you want to read them, they are there. There's a few I might read, but I'm going to kind of stick to my notes and explain some of the context behind these quotes. I also translated the quotes quite quickly from French, so they might be a little awkward in places because I didn't have a lot of time. So some of the things that social work participants mentioned was this connection, the link between the individual and the environment, that social work is a part of an environment, is a part of communities, and that we aren't separate from the territory or the land or the family or the environment within which issues take place. And specifically, social workers talked a lot about how people that were the most vulnerable, this is not a surprise, it's in the literature, but they really brought up a lot of examples of recent climate events, like extreme climate events of, landslides, ice storms, flooding, tornadoes. And in these instances, especially the last several years in Quebec, we've had a lot of really big incidents. We've had big forest fires. We've had major flooding. We've had tornadoes that we've never had before, or anyway, not with the frequency that we have them with today. And the participants really talked about how people that are the most vulnerable with whom they work are the most affected by these extreme weather events and have the least amount of resources to be able to protect themselves, to be able to get by until the end of the month. There was talk about how we've had frequent ice storms and people lose their electricity for days, and what little food people have, they have to throw it out, and they don't have more income to be able to buy more food. So there was kind of this recognition that weather is becoming more extreme, there's bigger climate events, and people that are the poorest, that are the most vulnerable, people experiencing homelessness, for example, lose any kind of shelter that they have. So people are very much at risk from these extreme weather events. So there was kind of this recognition of kind of an intersectional lens. Participants would talk about intersectionality. Actually, they'd bring it up and they would talk about how people that are the most vulnerable, sometimes bringing up certain social categories of race, class, gender, and ableism, and talking about how people that were the most vulnerable suffered the worst consequences and had the least amount of resources with which to bounce back. So this is not new. We know this from the literature, but it creates a really vicious cycle of not being able to bounce back and to meet one's basic needs, right? So the also issues like environmental racism were brought up as well in these groups, so that there was inequitable exposure of racialized and poor communities to environmental risks. So people living in areas of the city, for instance, of Montreal as an example, in certain neighborhoods where there's the least amount of green space, where public transport is not well developed. So there was also this connection between, people's personal environments, how they could get by, and how they also had poor environmental conditions as well, or how there were often toxic waste dumps in certain communities. So social workers in these groups, whether they were practitioners, there's a lot of practitioners, or students or educators really were making these links with kind of an intersectional lens. So that was very interesting to us. I'm going to keep going on my results here. Some perspectives on practice. So this was also very interesting that social workers were, also making connections and sharing practices that they probably didn't learn in a classroom, but were creative and were coming up with different initiatives in their work. And there was this several examples about how helping people they were accompanying in practice or helping in practice, often using the environment or nature to get closer to nature, to bring people closer to outdoor environments, sometimes using a nearby forest, sometimes going for a walk, to make connections for people and to actually carry out therapeutic work in these environments. So, for instance, one person talked about how this whole idea of the environment as being external to us is not true. It's a part of us, and the closer we can bring people to natural environments, the more they will want to protect what they love. So if I have this close relationship with my environment, with nature, then I'm going to make every effort to kind of cultivate that relationship. People really talked about it like a relationship that they would have, and that they could also use in a therapeutic way. So that was quite interesting. So, for instance, one of the people here, she talks about having a richer connection to nature becomes both a means of intervention and a way of protecting nature. And especially for people who are often in vulnerable situations and don't have a lot of, access to outdoor parks or green spaces, that this could really go a long way in providing a sense of reconnection with obviously nature and the environment, but also themselves. So some of the social workers were actually developing practice in that sense. And the interesting part of that as well, and I think this is very true globally, I don't know about in Latin America, but at least in Canada, we're very much in an era of new public management and neoliberalism, where the work has become very siloed in social work. So programs are very much built around, a diagnosis and providing services for a certain diagnosis. And it's created a lot of silos between social workers themselves and the kind of work they carry out, as well as the kind of tools, evaluation tools, for instance, that are developed in those programs and that often really come from above into these practice situations. So some social workers would talk about the fact of having this closeness with nature and the environment and using outdoor spaces as a way to be therapeutic and to reconnect people was also a way to counter, to push back against some of the silos that have been created and the feeling of a loss of connection with one's own practice or a loss of meaning. So there was a lot of discussion about how coming closer to and utilizing nature and being a part of it and recognizing those connections also could be really meaningful for people in a very kind of existential way, and make them feel that kind of reconnection. And so that was something that really came out very strongly in the research, and several times and in lots of different ways. So the next slide is about, it's along the same lines, but some of the obstacles currently to being able to green practice or to use environmental social work or ecosocial or green social work practices. Because the work has become so siloed, and specifically, and I would say in certain areas of practice. So the areas of practice that are more specialized often, there's more of a kind of narrowing down of practice or working on specific things with people that social workers are trying to serve and help. So some of these obstacles are really from a top-down management, a kind of neoliberal vision of practice, an accountability, a kind of rendering, or like a statistical way of looking at practice. Here in Quebec, as I'm sure in a lot of the world, social workers have to keep certain statistics about the kind of work they're doing, how much time they're spending doing this or that, phone calls made or follow-ups. So there's really a tightening of controls on what social workers are doing. And so the idea of prevention thinking, working in a more global way, understanding complex phenomena, having a complex understanding of things, which is what social workers are really taught to think. Obviously, like we're not, we try to think of people in the context in which they're in, with all the complexity and the nuance and the tensions that can arise in different situations. So part of the problem with practice, and this is specifically in public institutions at the moment, is the siloing and this narrowing down of social work practice means that the whole idea of prevention and thinking more globally about people's situations has really been put aside. And so here we have some social workers talking about working in very ultra specialized programs. Sometimes what we call here is the third line, so very, very specialized. And so, social workers are responding to the very specific needs as prescribed by programs. And then without even realizing it, sometimes getting caught up and moving away from that very global understanding or complex understanding of social work practice. So anyway, social workers had a lot to reflect upon here in terms of the structures that don't allow for that thinking, and that when they're working in these situations, caregivers as well are often dealing with a lot of crises of their loved ones. And so having to think in more of a prevention way is not really possible in the moment. So see, these are some of the obstacles. I'm not being very specific, but there were a lot of examples about how currently public institutions aren't really allowing for this kind of thinking, prevention thinking, global approaches, and I would say liberty as well. So when I spoke about earlier, some social workers going for walks, going outside, going into forests with people they're working with, obviously some social workers could not really relate to those experiences because they didn't have that kind of liberty in their work. So very different degrees of autonomy in the workplace. I'm going to keep going. So in this slide, social workers are really making connections. There were educators and students as well, but I would say this was mostly from the social work practitioners that were talking about this relationship again, and how social work has really emerged in from modernist frameworks and from very anthropocentric frameworks, because we've been taught, and the knowledge base is around helping individuals, families, groups, and communities. And we've kind of perhaps moved away, forgotten about the importance of concepts of belonging to a territory, both like a social belonging, but also belonging to a certain living environment and in a certain community. And so some of the social workers talked about that it would be important to kind of reclaim these connections because things have become so compartmentalized in practice and knowledge, and that it creates a lot of suffering because it creates a lot of disconnection for people. So there was really a lot of, I would say, a concept that kept coming back was around connection and reestablishing these connections and these ways of making meaning, making sense of things for people, in a very, again, like I said before, in quite an existential way, but to really provide opportunities to recreate these connections, to help give meaning, to make meaning for people, because some social workers mentioned that the separation of human beings from nature, or even human beings as being the center of all things living, is really creating a lot of suffering as well for individuals. So there was a lot of discussion about how to reclaim and remake these connections, that it's not, nature isn't something that is separate from us, but we are part of nature, and nature is a part of us. So how can we encourage those kinds of links? I'm going to keep going here. So that's a very quick overview of some of the main results. I actually barely looked at my notes, so I was kind of just putting it in my own words here. But like I said, if anyone listening would like more information, you can just write to me, and we can connect online. As I said too, we are reaching the end of this 2-year project, so we are actively thinking about what kinds of knowledge exchange activities we want to do. However, we have already presented we have already done a few presentations in different conferences, both internationally and nationally here at home. But we were thinking about, how we want to keep the conversation going, and how we can help encourage the dialogue, and, like I said, inspire what we hope is a paradigm shift. We heard in the focus groups there was a real need to have spaces for reflection, have spaces for sharing practices, inspirations. It was really quite wonderful, because people often make connections in the group and then continued to stay connected, to be able to share resources and share strategies, and even strategies, I would say, to reclaim some of the collective thinking and the collective work we do so well in social work. So to move away from more of the individual practice, individual work, to collectivize and mobilize and strategize, to push back and resist also some of the neoliberal tendencies and strategies and the suffering that's taking place in different practice milieus. So in response to that as well, this idea that social workers were really asking as well for communities of practice to kind of keep the work going, and to have access to knowledge and transmit, mobilize some knowledge, but also just create the space for reflection and for sharing. We actually have a second project underway that's funded by our Institute of Public Health here. It's not just for social workers, it's for all social intervention practices. And we're going to be starting that in the fall, so the end of September, beginning of October. So building these communities of practice, largely, I would say too, I just wanted to also mention Heather Boeto's work, who is so influential, where she and colleagues put in place communities of practice models. And so inspired by her perspective, her eco-social perspective, eco-social framework, we are going to be putting some communities of practice in place in the fall. Again, though, the funding is for a period of, a year of communities of practice, meeting monthly. Where we will go from there, I'm not sure, but it's a first project trying to put in some kind of structure so that social workers and other social practitioners can share what they know, and also we will provide, with guest speakers and information, some themes, some kind of common themes in this work that we think could be really valuable. So we are currently, we've sent out a questionnaire around the province to find out what people know about climate change. This project specifically about climate change and building resilience. So we have some preliminary themes, but we also want the groups, the communities of practice, to be co-constructed so that practitioners can arrive with their preoccupations and that we could kind of build a program over a year to respond to their preoccupations. So thank you very much. I realize I forgot to put my email in my PowerPoint. It's summer holidays here, so I got a little distracted, but I can put it in the chat if people want to catch out and reach out, sorry. And these are just some of the resources that, the bibliography that figured in some of the work. So I will stop my share screen.
Wow, you do a good presentation. So even with the bibliography, wow.
Well, I try to, because these ideas are not my ideas. I mean, you know, as a researcher, professor, we pick the things that interest us and we put them together in a framework. But there's so many wonderful, we're so lucky in social work because we have wonderful thinkers and there's so much work that's been done already. And that is why for us in Quebec, we want to be inspired by what's happening outside of Quebec as well. And of course, we also want to be inspired by what's happening here. But I think it has to be a dialogue. We have to mutually inspire one another to create change, right? It takes, and I think that's what's very hard in this work is climate change and climate justice. It's so big, it's so daunting.
Yes,
that you
and
can
people didn't realize that what is going to happen in the future, right?
Yeah, I mean, so we have to be able to have these dialogues so that we can collectively support one another. Because if we, in social work, if we don't have hope, then we don't, what are we doing? We have to be able to still have some hope. So yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Thanks,
It's very interesting and important also, no? You start since the importance of the lands, no? What is happening with the lands now? The people is leaving their lands because companies are doing explore and exploitation. Even in my country, is in some areas are illegal, no illegal groups of people who destroy many hectares of the nature, and little by little is getting worse. And even in Brazil also, no. I think I heard you say that one of your research was in Brazil.
No.
No, no,
No, that wasn't me. That would be interesting.
Entonces, well, in Latin America, this is the problem with the land, no? With the indigenous community that live the lands, because the devastation, no? It get involves many things, no? Communities, natures, and global warming also, no? Because the nature protects us.
Yeah.
And what is our role?
Yeah, no, it's very similar. Well, it's similar. I don't know if it's similar, but us too. I mean, there's really big movements here, indigenous movements for, reclaiming land and reclaiming territory, and which I totally agree with. I don't think we can even talk about ecological and environmental social work without talking about self-determination and indigenous right to land, because here in Canada, the people that are the most affected and that have been the worst treated in Canada are our indigenous people. And so, like you're saying, Catalina, like exploitation, extractivism, the death of species, this is mostly happening in indigenous lands, So we have to connect those dots. A climate change, a climate justice movement also has to be like an indigenous led, and I'm not an indigenous person, I'm a sixth generation Scottish settler, uninvited guest to to a small island in Prince Edward Island, and in Canada. So we have to connect those dots, and I think that's part of the work too. It didn't come out in our results as much as we would have liked, because as researchers, we feel very strongly about that. But, we're following what people are saying. But when we talk about inspiring a paradigm shift, changing practices, changing training, changing not, like we have to connect those dots because the ecological movement and the decolonial movement are very intertwined, and the logics of extractivism, exploitation, dispossession, they're very similar, right? So
Yes,
yeah,
yes. Well,
yeah,
different context, but the point is almost the same, no? It's talking about the indigenous communities and economical thing behind that also. And they
yeah.
don't care what is going to happen with the global warming, with the climate, no, and everything. But our work is just promoting, no, the protection of the nature and this relationship with our nature too. So that I think that you are doing a good work with it. So I congratulate with all the things that you're doing, because I see are very active with this subject. and
Trying, yeah.
and and that way of the focus group lets you is like more closer, not to get more information about a situation. No,
What's nice about focus group, I love doing focus groups. So I
it's better
also,
than the questionnaires. Do you think?
yeah, definitely. I really don't like questionnaires, even though we are doing one right now just to get things started. But for what's nice about focus groups, especially when we're talking about such a big issue or big issues, is that the participants share and they feed off each other and they provide support to one another. And it makes wonderful connections. After a focus group, often, participants will share their email addresses and stay in touch. And it creates, it really is like starting a dialogue, opening things up. And it provides also I think one of the problems with practice being so silo and compartmentalized is you feel very powerless sometimes to change, to affect, to feel like you have an impact on any kind of social issues. But when you're together, at least you can collectivize the thinking, you can share strategies, you can share practice tips, and it really can encourage. It has so many wonderful spin-off effects that
Yes, it's
yeah,
no, it's rich.
yeah.
Yes. Well, some girls of the room have some questions. Any comments, girls? Talk. A ver, let's see. In this YouTube. Nancy, Lely, Sandra, maybe you speaking Spanish, I could translate to English. Don't worry. Huh? Yeah, just Nancy or Sandra, Vanessa, Leslie, cualquier, chicas, pueden hablarlo en español y yo lo convierto en inglés, lo traduzco al inglés, no se preocupen. ¿Mm? Quizás Sandra quiera hablar un poco. A ver, Sandra.
Yo no entiendo y no sé hablar español, pero entiendo muy bien español. eh, Inglés no sé hablar inglés.
I understood all that.
I don't speak English.
I don't.
I live in the Albufeira, Algarve, and lots of English, but now I don't live in the Albufeira and forget the English. Forget.
No problemo. I don't speak Spanish, but
But
francés, anglais.
I
No, pero
understand.
puedes
I
hablarlo en
understand.
español, Sandra. Puedes hacer alguna consulta o un comentario, pregunta y te traduzco al inglés.
Yo entiendo el inglés, pero no hablo niente, nada, no sé hablar.
She said that she understands English but don't speak English.
Yeah, I was understanding that. And I
Yeah,
think
most of them don't speak English, but try to understand the.
I wish I spoke Spanish. I really want to learn. I have to. I took Spanish in university, but too long ago, and I understand it quite a bit when you're speaking. I kind of catch it, but I no habla, no doesn't come out.
Vanessa, she's from Argentina. She say hi. She don't speak English. She understand a little English. But at least people is trying.
You're very good. And I think, am I right, Carolina, that is it Ameline or Nancy? Somebody's presenting just after me about similar things in the Philippines.
Amelie, yes, she's from Philippines. Yeah.
Oh, that's so
Maybe
interesting.
Amelie has any comment?
Maybe she's not there yet.
Are you there?
Sorry, I don't have comment. Un poco español. Hablas español un poco.
It's no problem. I wish you a good presentation, Ameline. I can't stay, but I wish you a good presentation. Yeah.
Yeah, she's the second time that she's with us. Last year we had a congress, and she has been with us. Now it's her second time. But we just continue talk, and maybe we could continue with our relationship with our organizations and try to help each other and support with the knowledge. And I could add a link of your organizations to my webpage, maybe for the people in Latin America could check it out.
For sure.
Work. So thank you so much, Sue.
Thank you
for accepting me. We were just talking for the invitation. And
Thank you. I like it.
Hi. And congratulations for your interview, for your presentation. People say congratulations in your presentations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation, and have a wonderful week of presentations.
We still have some days until Saturday. Yes, all day long. Still the first day.
Well, have a wonderful evening, and thank you very much. And gracias
to you for your time, for the work, because it's a time, and you give us a little space on your agenda.
Okay, bye.
Thank you so much, Sue.